Welcome! Today, we're going to break down a really crucial and, let's be honest, often complex part of the Fidic contract. I'm talking about Clause 11. This is the one that governs everything that happens after the main works are handed over. Okay, so let's picture the scene. The taking over certificate has been issued. The client is happy. They're using the facility. But as any engineer who's been around the block knows, this is rarely the end of the story, right? This is when the small issues, those hidden defects, and little outstanding items, well, they start to make an appearance. And that's exactly where Clause 11 comes into play, giving us the framework to manage this absolutely critical final phase of the project. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to cover what happens after handoff, walk through the process for fixing defects, break down who's responsible for what, talk about why this all matters so much, and then we'll wrap up with a practical playbook for you engineers on the ground. Right, let's kick things off by defining the core concept that starts the moment a taking over certificate is signed. And you need to know, this isn't just some informal grace period, it is a contractually defined phase with very specific rules and obligations for everyone involved. The whole process really hinges on something called the Defects Notification Period, or DNP for short. The easiest way to think of it is as the project's warranty period. It's the official window of time. It's often a year, but you've always got to check your contract, where the employer can formally notify the contractor of any defects. This defined time frame is literally the backbone of Clause 11, because it prevents the contractor from being on the hook forever. So what's the contractor's main job during this period? Well, it's really two things. First, they need to complete any of that minor outstanding work that was listed on the taking over certificate. And second, and this is the big one, they have to go back to the site and fix any defects or damage that are reported before the DNP expires. The ultimate goal? To make sure the project is in the exact condition the contract demands. Simple as that. Okay, so how does all this actually work in practice, out on site? This is where Fidic gets very specific. It lays out a clear step-by-step process, and there's a really good reason for that. If you follow these steps, you are much less likely to end up in a dispute. The process is a really clear, logical loop. It always kicks off with a formal notice. No verbal agreements, okay? The contractor then gets to work fixing the problem. If the cause is a bit of a mystery, the engineer can actually order a search. And crucially, if any tests failed before, they might have to be repeated to prove the fix actually works. This isn't just bureaucracy. It's a structured process designed to make sure problems are solved permanently, not just patched over. And now for the million-dollar question, isn't it? Who picks up the tab? Thankfully, Subclause 11.2 is very clear about how we figure out who is financially responsible. The rule is actually quite simple. The cost follows the cause. If the defect is because of the contractor's own design, or they used poor quality materials, or the workmanship was shoddy, basically any failure on their part to meet their obligations, then the cost is entirely theirs. This is the core quality guarantee that's built right into the contract. But what if the cause is something outside of the contractor's control? Let's say the defect is due to the employer's design, or maybe some unforeseen stress on the system. Well, that's a whole different story. The remedial work is instructed as a variation, and in that case, the employer is the one who pays for it. Understanding the process is one thing, but knowing the specific roles each party plays is absolutely key to making Clause 11 work smoothly and, keeping everyone out of conflict. Let's break down these rules. Think of the contractor as the doer. They're the one who fixes the problems. The engineer is the impartial administrator or referee. They notify, they instruct, and they certify. And the employer? They're the enabler and the enforcer. They have to provide access to the site, but they also hold the power to act if the contractor doesn't perform. It's a really well-designed system of checks and balances.
All right, let's just zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. Why is this one clause so absolutely fundamental to the success of a construction project?
For the employer, Clause 11 is pretty much the ultimate safety net. It's the guarantee that they get the quality they paid for even after they've taken over the facility. It's the contractual lever that forces the contractor to stand by their work, which protects the long-term value of their huge investment. And for the contractor, for them, successfully getting through their Clause 11 obligations is the path to finality. It's the last hurdle. It's how they prove they've delivered a compliant project, which then leads to the issuance of the performance certificate. And that certificate is the key. It unlocks final payment, it gets their performance security released, and it formally marks the end of their liability on the project.
Okay, now let's boil all of this down into some actionable advice for you, the project engineer. How do you actually manage this phase effectively in the real world to make sure you get a smooth closeout for everyone?
Here is a pro tip, and it comes straight from the people who write these contracts. A few weeks before the DNP is set to expire, get everyone together, the employer, the engineer, the contractor, and walk the site. Agreeing on a final defect list in person builds transparency and is honestly the single best thing you can do to avoid those last-minute disputes.
I really can't stress this enough. Document everything. A phone call or a casual email might not be contractually valid. Every single notification of a defect has to be a formal, written notice just as it's defined in the contract. As the engineer, your paper trail is your best defense, and it's the clearest way to enforce the contract.
This is a really key point. The contractor isn't just obligated to fix defects, they are also entitled to access the site to do it. The employer, who's now in control of the site, can't unreasonably block or delay them. If they do, the contractor could actually have grounds for a claim. Your role as the engineer is to facilitate that access and keep the whole process fair for both sides.
This is a critical distinction to make. When you instruct a contractor to, say, dig up a pipe to find a leak, you're kicking off a process. If it turns out the leak was from their own poor workmanship, they bear all the costs. But if it was caused by something else, something that wasn't their fault, that search becomes a variation and they are entitled to be paid for that work.
And this is the finish line. Once the DNP is over, once all the notified defects are fixed and all their other obligations are met, the engineer issues the performance certificate. This is the final sign-off. It officially confirms the contractor has fulfilled all their duties under the contract, and it closes the book on their involvement.
So, at the end of the day, Clause 11 can either be a smooth, collaborative process that ensures quality, or it can become a field of disputes and claims. And how it plays out on your project is going to depend entirely on clear communication, proactive management, and a fair and thorough understanding of these very, very important rules.